I shall now introduce our speaker, who's coming all the way from New York, Ann Cecil Sterman, who is an author. She has written 2 books on acupuncture, one on pulse diagnosis and another, it's called Advanced Acupuncture, a Clinic Manual, that are very popular. She's a longtime student of Dr. Jeffrey Yuen and does a lot of presence online. I think she does a blog and she does a couple of chats a month. She will have to leave us promptly because she has something else about 10, just after 8:10. So, but we can still answer questions after that. So I will pass it on to you now, Anne, and welcome. We're really, really pleased and excited to hear what you're going to tell us about your experience working with long COVID.
Thanks so much, Susan, and thanks everybody for having me here. And if you're on the fence about turning your camera on, I would really love you to turn it on. And if you really don't want it off, it's that's of course completely fine, but it's much easier to speak to receptive faces rather than the black screen with the white. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Bless your hearts. Thank you. It makes a huge change. So COVID, it's an interesting situation that we have. And when we talk about long COVID, we're talking about the symptoms that, well, if you look on the web, you see all the things that we find in the clinic for long COVID: fatigue, shortness of breath, cough, joint pain, chest pain, and then poor concentration, depression, pain in the flanks, headache, intermittent fever, and pounding heart. Well, one of the rules of Chinese medicine, as you know, is that we don't treat signs and symptoms. When we're interested in the signs and symptoms, but the signs and the symptoms do not determine the treatment that we are going to perform. Instead, the diagnosis of the individual is foremost. If we treat signs and symptoms, we're missing the root cause of the disease. When you could say, well, the root cause of the disease is the COVID virus. And I would argue that it is not the root cause of long COVID, strange as it may sound. The root cause of the syndrome that we see and call post-COVID is the aftermath of the insertion of the virus, if you would, and the body's inability to clear the debris of the aftermath of that invasion. So today's talk is about getting behind the signs and symptoms and having a look at the mechanisms in the body and how we might approach these mechanisms regardless of the type of training that you have. And I'll be using some jargon. I don't know if any of you are students of Dr. Yuen's, but my specialty is the complement channels. That means the sinew channels, the low channels, divergent channels, and 8 extra channels. But for this lecture to be of interest, I don't think you need any prior knowledge at all, because I will go from the invasion of the pathogenic factor, and we'll go through in a 101 stage, that's an American term, and arrive at various ways to approach it. But first of all, COVID, the coronavirus, it's like a common cold virus, as we know, but what do we know about it in terms of Chinese medicine? And of course, the jargon in the classical texts for viral infection is wind cold. The wind brings this mysterious force laced with the virus, cold, and this compound event, wind and cold, enters the body at the wind gates at the back of the head. And in a regular wind cold, which would be like the common cold that affects an individual in a household or in a classroom, it might affect 2 or 3 people in the classroom. I would call that a minor wind cold, where you have sneezes. You get a tightness at the back of the neck. You might sweat a little bit. You sneeze it out, and then the tension at the back of the head disappears, and you might have a runny nose for a while as the cold contracts that virus into the center of the body, and then you eradicate it. And the purpose, as we know from the Su Wen, which is the foundational text of our practice, as all acupuncturists have that as a foundation, the Su Wen tells us that that wind cold is the cause of 1,000 diseases. And what they mean when they say that, of course, is not that the wind cold itself creates 1,000 diseases, but the failure to eradicate it does that. And the common cold doesn't take very much to push off. But then there's another kind of wind cold, which qualifies as a pandemic virus, pandemic wind cold. And this variety of wind cold seems to have more force. It has more presence. It has the capacity to penetrate perhaps more deeply. And I would argue there that the word change, which is really the meaning of the word wind. So when we say in Chinese medicine, when we say the wind comes and creates change, that's code for the wind comes and it brings cold. So change comes with a virus. The virus enters the body, it attaches to the DNA, it creates a change in the DNA, and then the mysterious force leaves the populace, and the consciousness of the populace is forever changed. So our job as acupuncturists is to help the recovery after that the virus has done its deed on the general populace. And so to describe the way out, I think we need to describe the way in. So I'm going to the board. Andrew is going to help me get to the board. So I'll go to the board. And Susan, you're able to toggle. Yes, good, thank you. There we go. So if we draw the primary channel as a long line, at the end of the primary channel is the Jing Well point. And the Jing Well point has a function of creating defense against the pathogen against the entry of the pathogen in the first place. So the Jing Well point, when it encounters the virus, will create a tension in the sinew channel, will create a sweat, a sneeze, and ideally that pathogen will be eradicated just by the act of sneezing. Then if that fails, if the sinew channels fail, which means that they haven't been able to create a sweat or a sneeze, the pathogen then reaches the exterior and comes to the next class of point, which is the yin spring point. As you know, the yin spring point is responsible for creating a sweat or a fever in order to try to burn that pathogen up. But if there's not enough yang qi to create a fever to burn it up, the pathogen keeps moving. It will come to the shoestring point. The shoestring point is like a saloon door. It has the capacity to sweep something in or to sweep it out. If there's not enough yang qi there, the pathogen will come to the yuan source point, and that point is the first point on the channel that is able to hold on to the pathogen for any period of time because it has like a receptacle-like nature to it. But the source point also is a doorway into the constitution, and it's not its nature to hold a pathogen. And so the source point says, well, we want to get rid of this. And so it moves it up into the low point. The low point is the first point on the channel that has the capacity to hold the pathogen latent or at bay for a lengthy period of time. And it does that by growing in the intermediate flesh. That means where you can't see it, deep in the musculature, it grows little through a process of angiogenesis. It grows tiny capillaries in the intermediate flesh. And we call those low vessels. And over time, those low vessels will float to the surface and become visible spider veins usually on the ankles or the lower legs or even on the inside of the arm. And when those vessels reach their limit of storage capacity, they shift that pathology into a neighbouring channel, which is where we get the low source connection. So it will send it to the Yuan source point on its partner channel. So if this were the bladder channel, then we see that the bladder low is sending to the kidney source, for example. And then as we already said, if the Yuan source point is unable to, or declines actually, to hold that pathology, just as this Yuan source point did, it moves the pathology up into the low point. This low point starts growing spider veins in the intermediate flesh, which float to the surface. When that's exhausted, either because there's not enough space or because there's insufficient blood to create more spider veins, it sends it back to this Yuan source point. So you have this crisscross action, Yuan source, low source, low source. And then this point says, I've seen you before, I'm not having you. And it sends it right up through this exhausted low point and then to this Hesse point. And as you know, the Hesse point has access to the interior, and it will not allow the pathology to sit there, because once the pathology is there, it has access to the organs. So it then diverts this pathology away from the constitution and finds a place to put it. And its choices are the divergent channels or the 8 extra channels. And it's the divergent channels that we're particularly interested in. Now, in order for this talk to be useful to you, you don't need to know the divergent channels, but I want to explain the mechanism in case you become interested in the divergent channels, and then I will give you my Shan Han Lung, Xiaoyang zone protocols to deal with that. Once it goes to the divergent channels, it's looking for the art of the divergent channel is to create a space in which the pathogen can sit. So the first divergent channel is the bladder divergent channel, and its function is to move pathology into cushy areas where the pathogen can do no harm. So the bladder divergent and its partner, the kidney divergent, lock this pathogen into the belt channel DMI, which is part of the trajectory of the kidney divergent channel. And there it sits for quite a while. We're still not at long COVID yet. So when DMI gets exhausted, the kidney and bladder divergent channels send that pathology to the gallbladder liver divergent channels. And this particular pair has a unique zone in it. So the gallbladder divergent channel, which has on its trajectories gallbladder 1, REN2, REN2 has these points on its trajectory: gallbladder 24, gallbladder 25, REN14, REN17, liver 14, and gallbladder 24. And it also has REN3. And what all of these points have in common is that they are all mu points. They're all collection points. So the gallbladder and liver divergent takes the pathology, let's say it is the COVID virus, it takes that pathology and it parks it at the mu points. I'll go back because that's all the drawing I wanted to do. So it parks the pathology in these mu points. And what is key about COVID is that we see this predominance of chest signs and symptoms. Why is it putting it in the mu points? Because the function of the mu points is to accumulate Jing essence and to allow blood to convert to Jing essence in order to store pathology. Now, it's my contention that because it is the function of the COVID virus to produce a change in the DNA of humanity, that it has to find its way to these mu points and it has to create these chest signs and symptoms, at least temporarily, as it's able to connect with Jing essence, which commands the DNA. So these changes to the DNA are happening at mu points and eliciting Xiaoyang signs and symptoms because of the predominance of gallbladder signs and symptoms, and because Dai Mai, which is the initial holding vessel for pathology that is encompassed by the kidney divergent channel, has failed to hold on to it. Now, that would be one lens. Another lens you could put on COVID, long COVID, is that Yang Wei Mai, the channel that is responsible, the 8 extra channel that's responsible for the distribution of yang qi to the surface, has failed. So Yang Wei Mai is a channel, it's a very interesting channel. I have a picture of it here. Yang Wei Mai is a very interesting channel because it commands Wei Qi, but it connects to the constitution at Du 16. It connects right into the cerebellum, which is where anything that's adversely affecting the Wei Qi level, the defensive Qi level, will access the constitution. So you could say, well, you know, long COVID is a Yang Wei Mai issue. And if you read the symptoms of Yang Wei Mai, I'm reading from my own book. I'm not trying to sell you my book, but I just want to tell you I'm reading my own notes. But if we read the signs and symptoms, we see chest and rib pain, optic issues, ear issues, vocal cord issues, dizziness, respiratory tract infections, irritated ears and nose and vocal cords, jaw, throat, rhinitis, shooting pain, palpitations, cough, spontaneous sweat, alternating chills and fever. These are all COVID signs. So that's affecting a channel that allows transit of a pathogen from the weight level into the constitutional level, from the defensive, the exterior, into the constitutional. We could look at it that way. You could treat it with Yang Wei Mai, or you could go to the Shan Hang Lung, and the Shan Hang Lung, which is probably, well, would be the second most famous text in Chinese medicine, of course, is 70% about wind-cold invasion, including epidemics. So if we see it as being the Shaoyang zone of the Shanghan Lung tradition, we go through the signs and symptoms of that. We see that in the Shanhang Lung, they talk about the distension of the breasts, the flanks, the diaphragm, difficulty breathing, liver qi stagnation, right, sour taste in the mouth. We see this in COVID, belching, nausea, abnormal thyroid activity, pain in the temples. The temples are half yin and half yang, so that will be very Shaoyang. Plum pit qi, migraine, reduced appetite, weak limbs, restricted breathing, irritability, restlessness, abdominal distension, alternating fever and chills, diarrhea and constipation. We could put that on it too. If you were to treat it with Shaoyang, according to the Shaoyang tradition of the Shanghanlong tradition, Shaoyang zone, an hour is a very short time, so I'm going fast. But if you were to treat it with that lens on it, what you would need to do is go to the shoestring points and push the thing right back out again. That means that the simplest approach would be to go to Shaoyang. That would mean triple heater primary channel and gallbladder primary channel. Needle the shoestring points. Remember, we talked about those as being like saloon doors. Needle them pointed outward. So that would be triple heater 3 pointed outward, gallbladder 41 pointed outward. And then you would have to activate the sinew channel that is overlaid on that. That would be gallbladder 44, the Jingwell point pointed out, and triple heater 1 pointed out. And the intention of your treatment would be, the treatment principle would be to push pathology out from the Shaoyang zone into a more exterior zone, and the only one would be, depending on how you argue, would be Taiyang, the Taiyang zone. So what you're saying is the initial defense of the body, the Taiyang zone, which involves the tightening of the entire back. I have a picture of that here. So you're saying that Taiyang, saying that this failed. That channel, Taiyang sinew, failed to push the pathogen off. Then you're going to needle those Shaoyang, shoestring and Jingwell points to push it back out to that zone. And then as the patient recovered more qi, then you would move to the Taiyang zone and needle their shoestring points and Jingwell points and push it all out by creating a sweat. That would mean bladder 65, small intestine 3, bladder 67, and small intestine 1. So that would create that. And if you wanted to do some extra things, of course, because you're taking the pulses and determining what you need, if you needed to regulate qi and blood, you would needle, Ren 17 and bladder 17. They each regulate qi and blood. And you can even use a point in Shaoyang to help push the pathology out to Taiyang, and that would be triple heater 6 and triple heater 9. So triple heater 6 is 3 sun back from triple heater 4. That pushes from Shaoyang out to Taiyang. Triple heater 9, which is 7 sun up, pushes also from Shaoyang into Taiyang. So they're the mechanisms. And you could treat through any of those lenses until the cows come home and fail utterly fail, because none of these protocols will work. And this is where I believe the errors are being made in treatment. None of it will work if there is insufficient systemic hydration. It's hydration that enables the movement of pathology from the interior, from battling going into the interior, from sitting in Shaoyang. Am I in? Am I out? I'm trying to get in. That's why all those chest signs and symptoms occur, because the battle between the exterior and the interior, when the body says, I'm not letting you in. I'm not letting you into the viscera. Of course, that's the 24/7 game of Chinese medicine, is to ensure that nothing goes anywhere near the most precious jewels, the viscera, the lungs, large intestine, stomach, spleen, bladder, kidneys, etc., liver, gallbladder. They are seen to be the absolute interior, the crown jewel of the human being. Is all in the torso. So the fight involves the chest, because the body will do everything it can to get the chest to hold tight and to prevent the pathology moving into that realm, into the deeper abdomen. So the tightness of the chest is occurring because there's insufficient fluids to create enough movement for this to happen easily. And so qi comes in and holds everything tight, just waiting for something to come in, waiting for something to help that situation. And all the while this happens, yang qi is being depleted. And as yang, because this takes a lot of yang qi, right? It takes a lot to create all this distension in the flanks, in the diaphragm, in the chest, to keep coughing, keeping this pathogen. Can we push it up? Can we push it out? Can we push it up? And so the coughing becomes more and more exhausting. The yang qi, which is financing that cough, becomes depleted, and then the person is in a spiral, especially if they're given corticosteroids, which reduce the capacity of the kidneys to replenish yang qi, so it's suppressing yang qi. Then those people get into a spiral that they often can't get out of. All of this is avoidable if systemic hydration is in place, because if the body had been able to create a wet cough in the first place, or even better, a sweat in the very, very first place, which is what most people have done. So most people are experiencing no signs and symptoms at all, and they were able to encounter it without knowing it. They encountered it, they had a little sweat, they might not have noticed it. It might have entered the Taiyang zone, and they might have just peed it out. Sorry if that's American language. It's a bit rude, isn't it? It's a bit rude in England. No, it's okay. Okay, I'll get away with that. Sorry. So that's what they say here. But so I believe that I had COVID myself, because but I didn't know until I read in the paper a couple of months later that people with COVID, they can't smell, they can't taste anything. Now, that's an unusual symptom, that you can't taste anything. And I said to my husband, Andrew, who you'll meet at the end of question time, because he's going to take over the last 15 minutes of questions. And I said to my husband, do you remember that? Like a couple of months ago and he cooks all the meals, right? And it's delicious. And I said, do you remember I said to you, I can't taste anything? I said, this tastes like nothing. And you were so deeply offended. And then I remembered at the time that, pardon me, but the the urine was very dark yellow at the same time, and I hadn't put two and two together because I felt fine. I felt absolutely fine. Also, I was in the clinic full time at that time, because that would have been January or early February. I was in the clinic full time. None of my patients contracted COVID at that time. They all had it deep in lockdown. Not all of them, like some of them, the ones who did get it, got it deep in lockdown when they were not exercising. They managed to get themselves dehydrated and exhausted, like with worry and fear. Anyway, that's another story. So really the question of treating COVID effectively is it's not principally to be able to choose the right strategy, because it's very clearly a Xiaoyang issue until it worsens and becomes deeper. What I think we need to be working on as a profession is the fostering of systemic hydration. So a few acupuncture points become extremely important. They would be REN 12, like CV12, the command point of fluids, the opening point of the stomach, the master point of fluids, which also happens to be the first point of the lung primary channel. The lung primary channel begins at REN 12. It goes down to stomach 25. That's its only descending branch. That's why when we go to the bathroom, we hold our breath. That's to push that chi from the lungs down into stomach 25, and then it comes back up to REN 13, and then it moves over to lung 1, which is where it becomes exterior, and then of course it goes down to lung 11. So what REN 12 is telling us is that if we're systemically hydrated, the lungs will be able to produce the mucus that it needs to manufacture a medium to float that pathogen, the coronavirus in the case of tonight, to float that pathogen out of the mouth. That would be the most important point, I think, in the treatment of COVID, whether we're looking to prevention or the treatment after contraction. Other points would be stomach 42. Stomach 42, another master point of fluids, brings fluids up to the sensory orifices. So it's a very wonderful point for the flushing of the sinuses. If the sinuses are not clear, they're unable to if they're not clear, and which means they're full of mucus or phlegm, they will trap the pathogen. So the pathogen, and there's another clause, as you know, in the Suen or the Ling Shu that says that the sinuses are the origin of 1,000 diseases also. All they're saying is that if you allow phlegm to get stuck in the sinuses and sensory orifices, then you have a ready bed for pathology to sit and multiply. So what stomach 42 does is it brings fluids from the stomach up into the sensory orifices and the sinuses to flush them out. And that clearing prevents this little factory of reproduction of the pathogen in the sinuses. So that's a very, very important point. Another point will be triple heater 2. Another master is called the fluid gate, and that builds systemic fluids. So there's some handy points for building fluids so that there can be an evacuation, whether it be through coughing, sweating, urinating, defecating, sneezing. Sweating would be the main one. So all of those processes require fluids to shift the pathology out. And the main fluid that we need Andrew, I'm going back to the board for a second.
Yeah, very good.
Go back to the board. Just a minute. So the stomach produces 4 classes of fluids. It produces pure fluids, and it also produces turbid fluids, which is almost an unfortunate translation because turbid, you know, in common language means dirty, but that's not what they mean. They just mean a little bit thicker than the pure fluids. The pure thin fluids, so these are divided into thin and thick. Thin and thick. Pure thin fluids go to the sensory orifices. The turbid thin fluids go to the Zangfu, the organs. The turbid thick fluids go to the curious organs. But the pure thick fluids, and these are the ones that we're interested in, these go to the sinews, the sinew channels. And the sinew channels are the ones that defend the exterior. They cover, I'm going back here now, and the sinew channels defend the exterior. And they do that by, and I want to see you all again, there we are. They do that by creating sweat. So when the exterior of the body experiences the invasion of a pathogen or the attempted invasion of a pathogen, the first thing is the sinews tighten, and then there's a sweat and a sneeze, or really there's a sneeze, and the sneeze creates this tiny micro sweat, which you might not even notice. But neither of those things can happen without 2 underlying forces. One is kidney yang. Sneeze is the most powerful and violent motion in the human body. So there must be kidney yang, meaning moving, warming qi to make that happen. And there must be fluids to create not only the sneeze, but there must be fluids to create that sweat, that micro sweat that follows the sneeze, which opens the pores, pushes out that pathogen when it first invades, and then then the yang qi snaps the pores shut again so that whatever is lingering around can't invade. So the capacity, the very essence of defense of the body is fluids. And all fluids are manufactured in the stomach, but they're not made out of nothing. And I don't know about your culture, but in this culture here, people they don't even think about it. And when they do, they just think, well, you know, my body's going to make the fluids that it needs. But if there's not fluids going in the mouth, the body will start to steal them. It will steal them from the muscles. It will steal them from the blood. It will steal them from the interstitial spaces, from the lymph, from the digestive tract itself. Anywhere it can find juiciness, it will just suck it all up and leave the body comparatively desiccated. So you can get away with that for a while. I think that you can probably get away with that until you're about 35. That's my experience in the clinic. Then beyond that, the truth comes to roost, and the responsibility to nourish fluids becomes almost a first priority. So I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I still remember that you really didn't have lunch or dinner without soup. So people in our culture, at least here in the United States, everyone's walking around with a drink bottle. They're all walking around with a water bottle. And now, because there's so much plastic in the oceans, now people are being really great about it, and they're carrying around their stainless steel canisters, right? And, you know, got to be hydrated, got to be hydrated. Water is not a hydrator. Water is a flusher. The drinking of plain flat water is absolutely essential, but it will not create added immune functionality. All it will do is keep you cleaner to a degree. So water flushes out toxins. So sometimes I'll take the pulses of a patient in the clinic, or these days when it's remote, I'm looking at their tongue and I'm saying, well, you're very dehydrated. They say, oh, that's impossible. I must drink, well, I don't know, like 3 liters of water a day. It's impossible. Can't possibly be. And then I'll say to them, yes, but with respect, you're going to the bathroom a lot. Say, yeah, of course I'm going to the bathroom. I say, well, you're probably drinking a glass of water or some of your water bottle, and then within 15 minutes you're in the bathroom. Yeah, that's normal. No, that's not normal. That means that you're drinking water and your body's saying, oh, that's my instruction to flush, 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 flush. And so these people are not just clearing the water they're drinking, they're clearing some of I know this sounds crazy, but they're drinking some of the fluids in their body that is responding to that water, that instruction of that water to flush the toxins from the interstitial fluids and part of the post metabolic waste. So the only way to get the digestive tract to manufacture sufficient pure thick fluids is to eat wet food. It's the only way. And I interrupted myself, but I remember in the 60s and 70s, you sit down for lunch and dinner, there will always be a soup. My mother always had soup on the stove. And she grew up in Ireland in the 1930s, and she remembers the big like cast iron crock hanging in the fireplace full time with soup in it, like really super old style. You just wouldn't dream of it. And I've inherited lots of English bone china, and in these sets of bone china, there's like always a set of soup dishes, always. So in the old days, you'd have wet breakfast, like it would be sloppy gloop porridge. And these days we in our household we call it congee because we make it with all different grains. And my husband Andrew Sterman, by the way, has written a lot about this wet food, and he has 2 books, Welcoming Food, that talk about the importance of this, inspired by Chinese medicine. But soups, porridges, stews, casseroles, these foods are essential for the immune system. And people with COVID, people who are worried about COVID, people who have COVID, and people who are recovering from COVID should all be focused on this profound systemic hydration. And by the same token, they need to be focused, and I think we all need, for our health, to stay supple and to celebrate our longevity. We also need to be focused, I think, on avoiding the things that desiccate. By that I mean things that cause inflammation. The foods that provide or cause, I should say, the foods that cause the greatest inflammation are the very foods which are being overindulged in during lockdown periods. Number 1 is sugar. Sugar is the most inflaming thing that we consume on by volume. And the reason is that sugar, really, when you eat sugar, you're consuming a very concentrated yang source, Y-A-N-G. It's a super concentrated energy source. So if you drive down on a highway in Australia, which I've done many times, and the sugar cane is like 8 foot tall, and you're driving down the road and you stop and you cut a piece. It's very hard to cut, but you cut a piece of sugar cane. I've done that with my kids in the car, and then you cut it again and again, and give everyone a piece of sugar cane. When you start chewing on it, It's very, very fibrous, but it's not very sweet. It's just a hint of sweet, and it's actually good for you. If you jump on the fibers, you're getting the enzymes that you need to yeah. It's Andrew's saying it's hydrating. It's actually hydrating. It's like a beautiful thin sap. Okay, so the tall sugar cane, and then so you're condensing all that energy into like a tablespoon of sugar minus the enzymes that it takes to digest it. So that if you were to take that much sugar and put it in a glass of water, and you keep pouring sugar and more sugar into a glass of water, eventually it gets thick and sticky. That's what's happening to people's blood. Then it won't move. You get blood stagnation. The body responds with heat. Let's bring yang qi to this blood that's failing to move very well and see if we can push it. So the stagnation and the heat that the body brings with yang qi creates this incredible inflammation in the bloodstream, and that inflammation calls upon fluid. It consumes fluid because then the body sends dampness to try to put out that fire. So sugar is number one, the most inflaming thing that will consume fluids. Then we have garlic, a diabolical consumer of fluids, which will heat up the blood. Onion, another one, great inflamer. Garlic and onion, terrific inflamers. Absolutely not in our fridge anymore for the last 30 years. Chocolate is another one. Caffeine, great inflamer, and alcohol. And if you have a look at what people are doing, they're eating a lot of chocolate, they're drinking a lot of alcohol, they're starting to cook again, but garlic and onion are featured in a lot of these cooking programs. And basically people are building an inflammatory situation, which then must be responded to by dampness, creating the damp heat scenario, which is the perfect breeding ground for COVID, because you've got this warm, you've got a damp, sticky situation, which prevents the movement of qi to move that virus back out again. And then because of that inflammation, you have systemic inflammation that creates systemic dehydration as the fluids try to put that fire out, and then you can't create that immune response in the first place. That's where our profession, I think, needs to focus. Clearing the heat, changing the diet. So clearing the heat would mean needling yin spring points like stomach 44, right? Like triple heater 2, like large intestine 2. These points dispel heat, even large intestine 11, even the TCM points, clearing heat. And bleeding low points, bleeding points like stomach 40, that will clear a tremendous amount of inflammation. Very, very extremely important to clear heat, but to prevent the consumption of these foods that hold us up with COVID. So that's the main message. I think perhaps Fiona and Susan, we could go to questions. Should we do that now, or do you want me to keep talking for a while?
No, that's absolutely fine. We can go to questions. That was absolutely amazing. I've really enjoyed that. I've learned so much there. Yeah. There is a question here. So if anybody has some questions, will you type a message, or you can use the raise hand facility. There's a question here. I need to put my specs on. From Felicity. She said, thank you. I like your idea of hydration, but not sure if you were talking about treating the acute virus attack. My understanding is that sweating, coughing, defecation is for the exterior and or exterior pathogen, but that has gone interior. But I thought long COVID was now in the viscera. How does hydration relate to long COVID?
It's a fantastic question. Long COVID is a term that means that the body has been unable to prevent the movement of the pathogen to the viscera, to the organs. Yes, I completely agree with that.
Stuck spaces.
Beg your pardon?
Stuck spaces, not necessarily this one.
Yeah, actually, and Andrew's saying that, yeah, and not necessarily the organs, but stuck spaces, you know, in the interstitial spaces as well. Yes. But my point is that you could come up with a protocol for moving that, and my personal protocol would be the divergent channels. That's where I go for that. But the point that I want to make in a talk that's just 1 hour long is that it doesn't really matter what protocol you choose. If you're lacking that deep systemic hydration, you can't move that pathogen. It simply will not move. It's planted there, it's cemented there by a combination of inflammation and phlegm. And so the persistent cough, which is one of the signs that the body is trying to clear from the interior or protect the interior or push out from the interior, that can't be successful because it can't get purchase on the depth to which that pathogen has reached. Now, if there is systemic hydration, the body will start to move that automatically into channels that clear from the organs. That will be the primary channels and the divergent channels. And then you can do work very, very quickly. But a lot of the protocols that the Western protocols are suppressive. They're you know, the steroid-based treatments and the treatments that seek to suppress symptoms are preventing the body and the channels really from allowing this movement outward. So if you want to talk about how protocols for how to remove the virus from these deep regions, you would be looking at the divergent channels, because the divergent channel's job is to provide passage for viruses that have breached the interior and lodged themselves in and around the organs to hop onto this this channel network and move back out to the sinews. The divergent channel's job is to connect the interior to the exterior. So they go in and they collect the pathogen that is threatening or that has threatened the organs, and it provides passage to the sinews. But it can't do that without hydration. The reason I'm focused on hydration in this talk is that I believe that it is not being discussed anywhere near enough. We're focusing on protocols instead of the mediumship that will allow the protocols to work. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So we've got a couple more here. So it's so interesting to hear your thoughts on hydration. From speaking with colleagues in the hospital dealing with very poorly patients in intensive care, the big problem in the lungs is fibrosis with the dry cough. So very different to usual poorly patients in ICU with moist lung secretions, such as with pneumonia or COPD, etc. Really interesting to hear how that pathology arises from a channel perspective. Thank you.
You're welcome. I was speaking to a patient in Russia this morning, and this patient is in hospital in Moscow, and they were eating So when the tray of food is delivered, there's some sloppy fruit, some vegetables and some whatever. And then there's this big bowl of ice cream. And the people with COVID in the next ward get the tray and eat the ice cream, and then they don't have any appetite for the quote unquote real food. There's no way those people can recover, because the cold has a constrictive nature. The cold offends the lungs so deeply that the cold can even stop the cough, right? Can stop the cough, but not for good reason, because it's suppressing even further. And the sugar creates more inflammation. I mean, it's a very, very big mess.
Yeah, so there's a couple here interesting, and it was something I was going to ask you as well. So somebody says, I was also intrigued about the garlic, which I had understood to be anti-inflammatory, and somebody else said about the onion and garlic recommended for the immune system, and now rethinking my pantry. And as you were talking about soup, is there any particular foods you would put in a soup? Is there something, that would be really useful? Because most of us, onion is a basis for so much of soup, isn't it?
Yes, I know. That's why I bring it up, because I think it's vastly misused. As far as foods to put in a soup, I'm going to leave that to Andrew, because he's the expert. But I want to answer the first part about the garlic and the onion. Garlic is a very ancient herb. It's been in use for a very, very long time. It is not a food at all. Andrew, don't go away.
I won't.
And the early caveats on garlic were that it be used for 1 month, and that it was specifically for blood-borne toxins. So if you felt you had a blood-borne disease, you would take a garlic decoction for 30 days, and the garlic has a very specific function. It is a magical herb in that it stimulates the immune system, and it directs the immune system to the blood. So it clears the blood from a dangerous pathogen, and it's almost like shock therapy for the blood. And you use it for a cycle of blood, which is 30 days, and then you stop. Because at the end of 30 days, if you've taken a strong enough decoction for that period of time, you will have cleared that blood-borne pathogen, whatever it would be, like syphilis, whatever. And then if you take it more than 30 days, after that pathogen has been destroyed, you're continuing to direct the immune system to the blood. And if there's no pathogen remaining in the blood, in other words, if there's nothing for the immune system to fight, the garlic is in effect requiring the immune system to attack the host. So you end up with autoimmune diseases caused by garlic, caused by the inflammatory effect of garlic on the blood.
In those people susceptible.
I beg your pardon?
In those that are susceptible.
Right. He's saying in those that are susceptible, but the damage that I've seen from garlic over the years is very significant. So over time, you build up this enormous amount of heat in the blood, and that requires the body to respond with dampness. That's my meditation alarm reminder. And then every day I do and you're all welcome. Obviously, you won't want to come today, but at 3:15 I do a daily meditation for 20 minutes. That you can 8:15 p.m. Anyway, so garlic creates an enormous amount of inflammation that's blood focused, and it will desiccate blood over time, and that results ultimately in the inflammation of the liver and the heart, and I believe is a significant cause of heart disease, at least in the United States. Garlic onion is a different thing. Onion creates sweating in the intestines. It causes the intestines to leach fluid, so that's dehydrating through that mechanism. You would use those foods if you felt that you were, let's say you had no spring onions in scallion, that would be scallions in American, like this, the tall green onion with the tiny white bulb down the bottom, almost the same width. So we call those scallions here. If you didn't have scallions to ward off your cold, the cold that you think you're coming down from, and all you had was some garlic, you would certainly use that. It would create an effect. It would create a sweat through internal heat, and that could rescue you from your cold.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah.
So we've got one here. Did you say to do the Ying Spring and Jingwell points in one treatment? And which needle technique is best? Shoestream
And Jingwell. So if you want to treat COVID, long or short, obviously you're going to add more points according to the pulses. If you find the pulses are slippery, you're going to have to treat dampness. If you find they're very rapid, clear more heat, etc. But to push out from Shaoyang to Taiyang, you use the shoestring point, and it's simply you would needle toward the Jingwell into the shoestring point, and it would be reduced. You're reducing. You're trying to create this movement outward, and also reduce the Jingwell point. And that would be triple heater 3 and triple heater 1, bladder 65 and gallbladder 41 and gallbladder 44.
Okay, thank you. So are leeks okay as a substitute for onion and garlic?
Yes, leeks don't produce that effect.
Okay.
Yeah. You can imagine if you had to, you could eat a leek raw, but you couldn't really chew on a clove of garlic raw, and you really can't like chomp into an onion and chew that raw.
Okay, so I've heard of people using onion juice rather than the actual onion. Is that any better? And that would suggest that in the Mediterranean diets are not good for the body, which is contrary to what is advised here.
Okay, so then if you wind the clock back, see, I'm old enough to do this now, but if you wind the clock back 30 or 40 years, and you go to the Mediterranean regions, and I did do this 25 years ago. I went to Naples for the first time, and we went to this. Our favorite thing to do before we had children was to go to European cities and towns and keep walking until we found a restaurant with no signs and no menu. They're our favorite restaurants, and we stumbled into what we now know to be Gino's in the back streets of Naples, with the laundry hanging between the buildings and everything. And there's this little tiny place with 4 blue and white checkered tablecloths, no menu, no sign. We went in there, and I speak Italian, so we went in there and we sat down. I asked for the menu, no menu. Good, you've passed the test. And then we said, well, and we were the first in, I said, well, what are you offering today? And he said, and he yells out to his mom, like, what are you cooking? And she yells back what she's cooking, and we had the most extraordinary meal. And one of them was a very simple pepperoncini pasta dish. And I asked, I said, like, I wish that I could, have the recipe to this dish. And he said, come with me. And he took me into the kitchen where his mother was cooking. And she said, I'm going to cook it from scratch for you. I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm doing. And they're like, you can watch. And she took the clove of garlic, she peeled it, she put a tablespoon of olive oil in the pan. She threw the garlic in, she turned it around. She said, girare 2 volte. So she said, she stirred around 2 times. and then pick it up and botar, and just throw it in the bin. And she said, never eat garlic. And so it's like solo performance. She's telling me, you just want the hint of the garlic. You don't want to eat that stuff. So, so I would argue that before we became obsessed with intensity of taste in our cultures, we were eating much milder food in those climates. Not talking about India or Pakistan or Sri Lanka or cultures where the food is hot to create a sweat on purpose. And of course, they've been doing that for more than seven generations. So they are accustomed to that. Their bodies are not responding as our bodies respond. And likewise with tomato, I can say to you, with tomato, I could tell you so many stories, but the short of it is that the Italians always boiled their tomatoes for a minimum of 6 hours, or sometimes all day. So the grandmother would put the tomatoes on in the morning and simmer them all day, and then all the solanines had disappeared. There are treatments for eggplant as well, and bell peppers, scorching them. And the tradition of eating those foods, which were previously considered to be toxic, came from periods where there was such poverty in those countries. I think I can take one more question.
Yeah, we've probably got one more, I was going to say. There are a few here, but Andrew's going to answer some of the food-related ones, isn't he?
Yes, thank you.
So there was, then do you suggest consuming onion if you're diagnosed with dampness in the large intestine to drain the damp?
Oh,
Do that.
okay. Why don't I hand over to Andrew? Because he can answer that extremely well.
Brilliant, because
thank you.
Yeah, the others are really to do with food. There's one about turmeric.
Yeah.
And do you think we have lost the sense of taste and smell even before COVID, which has tipped us over the edge?
Oh, that's interesting.
And right, you mentioned using protocols to push the pathogen from Shaoyang to Taiyang, and then needling points in the Taiyang to create a sweat to push the pathogen out. Would you do this on different sessions or in the same session?
Probably different sessions. That's a good question. Probably different sessions, because you want to let that sit there, and meanwhile you have the patient changing their diet, so there has to be an opportunity to create those fluids, so that when you go to Taiyang, there is some hope that the patient can create a sweat to push that out. But
thank you so much. I know you have to go. That was absolutely amazing. On behalf of everybody, I know everybody has really enjoyed hearing your perspective. It's really, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. And yes, I know. Thank you. Thanks for having me, and I hope to see you again someday. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Susan. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you, Anne. That's brilliant.
Okay, hi everyone.
Hi, Andrew.
From behind the command center here.
Okay, so there's a few questions here. So
Diet, not needles, I hope.
No, not about needles, all about food. So would you suggest consuming onion if you were diagnosed with dampness in the large intestine to drain damp?
Right, well, you could, I wouldn't, but you could if your intention was to bring things to fruition. Say there's dampness, let's add more dampness. And then the body will come to terms with the dampness. That's a relatively risky strategy. It's been my experience that the person will feel awful. And so I would not use that idea. I would use, I would have, for a patient with dampness in the lower burner and the large intestine in particular, I would have onions, bulb onions, on an avoid list, along with garlic and hot peppers. We'd be looking to drain the dampness using diuretic foods, which would be more string beans, snow peas. What are snow peas called in England? I've forgotten. I believe there's a different term. But in any case, what we call snow peas, originally from China, so they fit in with our medicine. And the hybrid between snow peas and what we call string beans or green beans would be sugar snap peas, but not garden peas, so not the shelled peas. We would be using the shelled pea inedible tubes, the casings, so the shell. So you can make a broth from from what you would throw away from garden peas, just the outer, what would be the shell in a sense. That would make a diuretic broth. We would do something like that, and it would be right into the intestines because it's fluid. We're taking it in the alimentary canal, and it would deliver that medicine. Other foods that drain dampness include barley, so barley tea or roasted barley tea, which you can get in a Korean market. You can make your own from whole barley, just roast it in the pan, dry roast until it's brown and aromatic, make a tea out of that. Is a strong, distinct diuretic, not too powerful. Corn husks or corn silk makes a diuretic tea. In fact, any peel, you could use the peel of cucumber, the peel of fruit, the peel of apples, and any peel of ginger. All of these are dietary diuretics. So I would be looking to drain dampness. Meanwhile, keeping in mind that one of the reasons, why has that dampness arisen? The dampness has arisen because we're eating a lot of damp foods like the ice cream that Ann was mentioning, or a lot of cheese, a lot of dairy, a lot of sugar, a lot of irritants where the body, there's a bit of a difference where things like dairy and sugar become sticky, they become phlegmatic. Other things like too much alcohol, too much hot pepper, hot capsicum, chili taste, these things irritate the intestines. Too many onions, irritating the intestines, which then respond by secreting dampness as an act of self-protection. So to the answer to the question, back again to the specific, it would be possible if you're using the strategy that we want to rid dampness by increasing dampness so the body can finally rid. Relatively risky strategy. I would move more for draining dampness, helping to clear it. Use again, of course, fiber. You check the status of elimination altogether. Take a look at the lungs, the parrot organ. Perhaps the lungs are dry, perhaps the lungs are damp and transferring dampness. Maybe the dampness in the large intestine is the act of the lungs clearing dampness and it's appearing in the large intestine on its way out. It is quite possible. You do see that. And in which case the onions would just exacerbate the problem.
Thank you. Fascinating. So where does turmeric fit in? Does it have similar dynamics to garlic and onion?
No, it's very different. Very, very different. Turmeric is really quite safe. It's a beautiful spice. It's in fact, it's a superstar antioxidant. And what's interesting about turmeric is that it clears heat and at the same time it's warming. So one of the problems we have is we very often faced with patients, whether it's COVID or otherwise, where there's an entrenched combination of heat and cold. You see this every day in your clinic. And the idea is, what do we do? Do we clear heat with this patient? But I'm seeing cold. Do we warm the patient? How do we warm someone who has inflammation? And this is, even though it's quite a basic question, it's a question we face every day, treating people. And in fact, cooking for the family. You see this question every single day. And so turmeric is really interesting because it does clear heat. Antioxidants are cooling. Oxidation is a heat process. So anyway, we're just like trying to bring these words, the terminology together. Antioxidants in our language of Chinese medicine are cooling and clear heat. Western protocol medicine, antioxidant. So turmeric clears heat while it protects the digestion and the gut, the lower gut, the intestines, from becoming cold in the attempt of clearing heat. So this is why we don't clear heat with ice cream or with ice in your drinks or cold water. Everyone thinks, oh, I have inflammation. Let me have iced water. It's particularly popular in America. And you could write a book about iced water and what's involved in that as a social message of the affluence the culture has to make all this ice, even when it's very, very hot out, or even when it's very, very cold out. We're warm our homes are warm, we're overheating our restaurants. Here's ice water. It's a kind of coded message of affluence that's causing terrible problems for health. And in particular, I might say in hospitals, we have someone with COVID actively in a hospital, in ICU, being given ice chips to melt on their tongue. This is heinous. Is there a word stronger than that? Who's got a word stronger than that? This is such a bad idea. It insults the lungs, as we all know, at the beginning of Chinese medicine training, cold insults the lungs. It's a terrible practice. And it also slows down digestion, bringing digestion to a temporary halt until we consume yang qi to raise the temperature of the stomach and the gut, further consuming yang qi. And as Ann was explaining, what you already all know, the problem with COVID is that most people, 98%, 99.5%, we don't really know because we don't know how many sleeper cases there are. These so-called sleeper cases are not bad. They're good. These are people handling a pathogen with their immunity. They don't even know they get sick. I have a colleague who's 75 years old, tested positive, and is baffled. When did she encounter a virus? She never got sick. Her husband is also, I think he's nearly 80. He's never been sick and he tested negative. So what do we know? Their immune system handled it. But the problem is that we're deficient in fluids and yang qi. We don't have the fluids or the mediumship, and we don't have the energy to move the fluids. So anything that consumes yang qi is dangerous at this time, or really any time. We want to preserve yang, or refresh yang is a term from Qigong, to renew yang qi or to refresh yang, to make it fresh again. So yang shen. So okay. Did that answer the question?
Yep, somebody said, thank you, you identified.
Oh, turmeric, we were talking about turmeric. So it warms the digestion and maintains warmth of the digestion, the stomach, and especially the intestines, and moving around to the other organs, spreading that warmth to nurture yang qi as it's being an antioxidant. So it's an excellent food. Remember, it's a spice, but it is also a rhizome or a root. So it has this descending down. Its effect takes place originally in the lower gut. So it's very, very different than garlic, which even though it grows slightly underground, it's tremendously uplifting. So the problem with garlic is that it just, we eat it to here and then it sends back up and increases blood pressure, pressing upward and out to the skin. So it does not have the same effect downward. So it's garlic has an ascending vector, whereas turmeric has more of a descending. And of course, all spices have a spreading vector, but turmeric and ginger, very similar with ginger, where turmeric is such a superstar, but ginger is also, should be seen as a working pair, because it's also a rhizome, or if you prefer root, it also has a way of anchoring its effects. It is warming, it's spreading, but very, very safe. Both are safe.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah, so would you recommend any particular herb teas to drink for those who are recovering from COVID?
You know, that's a funny question, because someone phoned a couple of months ago and says, I'm going down now. I'm trying to stay out of the hospital with COVID. It's really awful. What do we do? What do I do? What do I do? So I thought, well, what do you have around the kitchen? And prescribed something, so-called prescribed, if you want to call that. I recommended a tea made of kitchen ingredients. And he said it brought him through a terrible 2 days, but he avoided the hospital and he's made a full recovery. He said, Andrew, it was the tea. Now I need to study herbal medicine, which I never wanted to do. I'm really furious with you about that. And you just cost me 5-10 years. And but he avoided the hospital and intubation and all that. And now I can't remember what the tea was.
Oh
But
dear.
it was just like in the moment. But it was what he had in his kitchen. So, but I do believe that it depends on what stage you're in and what's deficient. So that's really what you need to know. How are you deficient? Well, we're presuming you're deficient in fluids. You're deficient in yang. So then look in your kitchen. Of course, we want hot water, not cold. So hot water, which is easy. And then maybe some cinnamon sticks would be guetza or some version. You may not have guetza if you're not an herbalist. But cinnamon twig, maybe even 2 to put in. Maybe some citrus peel to relax the liver as the liver's clamping up. The diaphragm is, because you're trying to protect. So you'd want to at least relax the liver so the lungs can function better, just to open the chest. Now you don't want to open the chest to invite the pathogen in, but with the combination of cinnamon, I'm trying to think of what I gave him, some cinnamon to be protecting and pushing up and out, as cinnamon does, and you'd want a pretty strong dose, maybe 2. If it's powder, it's quite difficult to make a tea out of it. So the sticks would be good. If you have only powder, you find some way to use it. It'll float on top. As its nature is a wei qi herb, cinnamon, it will float on top, up to the lungs, up to the neck, the back of the neck, occipital, etc. As what we know about cinnamon. So it'll float right on the top of the tea you're making, but it will still be effective medicine. It's just unpleasant to drink, actually. But you're using a great deal of cinnamon. I mean, if it's powder, maybe a 1/4 teaspoon. I'm just estimating. If it's sticks, maybe 1 or 2 sticks of the cinnamon cane, as they call it. Some citrus peel, maybe lemon, maybe if you have an orange. Normally in herbal medicine, we use chen pi, the peel of mature tangerine or mandarin orange. But lemon will suffice. If something you have in the kitchen, even lime. And then some ginger to warm and provide warmth. So the idea is that it's a cold, wind cold, so it's cold invasion, and possibly you have run down, right? We've been having too much raw food, too much cold food, that we've allowed the body to run down, yang deficient or qi deficient. So the ginger to warm all this up, the cinnamon to warm all this up, the maybe if you have scallion or spring onion, pardon me, if you have spring onion, you cut off the white part. The songbai is the white of spring onions, as is used in the Shanhanlong and in the writings of Gehong from the 3rd and 4th century. His famous remedy using the white of onion, which simply moves fluids. So the idea is that incoming fluid in the drink, the white onion moves fluids. The bulb onion is too irritating, but you might get away with it in an emergency. That's what the proper use for garlic and onions is, and chili pepper for that matter, is emergency immunity. But it won't work if you're qi deficient and fluid deficient. So there's nothing to move. So the idea that you need to bolster or nourish mediumship. So I think the tea I gave this gentleman was something like that: cinnamon, a citrus peel, not the flesh, but the peel. And with lemon, it doesn't matter that much because it's not very sugary. Some ginger slices. If you want to go further to the spring onion, the white part is the part we're looking for. You could use something fermented, paying tribute to Gehong and his famous formula for a common cold. That may not be strong enough for COVID, but remember, at the beginning of COVID, it's not different from a cold, really. It's when the infection becomes advanced, it can be much, much more dangerous. But the beginning is not that different. So Gehong's famous recipe is really a kitchen remedy from his book, formulas or remedies to have up your sleeve. Literally to have at your elbow is the translation of the Chinese. So and some of you, if not all of you, be familiar with that. And he has this beautiful remedy to ward off the beginning of a common cold, Taiyang stage of fermented soybeans, the black fermented soybeans, and spring onion. And the soybeans nourish fluids and the spring onion moves fluids. So this is pretty much what Ann is talking about. We're looking just to implement the strategies, the same thing in diet, the same strategies in acupuncture. Acupuncture, of course, has the acu in front. So there's all the technicalities of the precise function of the points. With diet, you're working globally. So anything you can do for hydration and moving and warming. So you could even use, you could make a soup. I'm just trying to improvise something. You find yourself with some courgette, zucchini, we say. We use the Italian word. So courgette, it's the same, right? And put that into a soup, not fried, of course. So fried food would be contraindicated with COVID because we're talking about a Shaoyang scenario where people get stuck. So we have to avoid fried foods, avoid anything but the tiniest bit of alcohol. Most people won't want any. They're too sick. They're too discouraged. But the tiny amount you could make a case for, moving blood, as alcohol does, as seen in Chinese medicine. But anything more than like a traditional sherry glass would be too much. So quite a 1 ounce, small, if anything. But so you want worried about protecting liver gallbladder is what I'm saying. So no fried foods and not overeating. So in any case, then you have the courgette, you have, we're making a soup. You'd have the spring onion, maybe some miso, which would be an easier version than the, in China, people have fermented black beans in every kitchen, but not so in the West. But it's quite easy to have miso and it lasts a long time in the refrigerator. So you could have some miso into your fermented soybeans. It's the same. Slightly different, but much the same. Seaweed, providing fluids, very, very helpful. Clearing heat, because when it gets trapped in the Shaoyang stage, that's when heat does, as I think Ann was mentioning that in some detail, the body will foster all this wei qi and yang qi, which will be experienced as heat. So we have to think about clearing heat. So seaweed would be quite useful. This is in lingering COVID. In the acute stage, it's not so important. At least, yeah, individual by individual. So you're really looking at where's the person deficient, and probably fluids, probably qi. And then, of course, there's stagnation. So there's pre-existing stagnation. So if we're looking at what are the comorbidities, which I think is a terrible word, morbid coming from the word death. So the comorbidities, can't we find in Western medicine a word that means something that will make a case probably more serious? Risk factors. There's a little bit nicer than comorbidity. It's the condition I died with. That's what comorbidity means. So in any case, the real risk factor is stagnation. And I'm thinking of the people I've been working with who had terrible cases of COVID. A few have died that I've known, that they weren't my clients. But the ones who survived, but really suffered enormously, long-standing stagnation. We just have to be honest about it. Overweight, sticky blood, sluggish breathing, and primarily comes down to sticky blood and depleted yang qi, depleted fluids. So that's the problem with garlic. If someone in your family, if you're really taking care of yourself, you're having soup once or twice a day, you're having congee, oat porridge, millet congee, millet, even steamed milk provides fluids. If you're eating in this fashion, soups and stews, and you're well nourished and you're getting enough rest, so you'd be pretty safe, and you're working with your own stagnation, emotional stagnation, blood stagnation, food stagnation, the status of phlegm, which we call phlegm stagnation, and qi stagnation, the 5 stagnations of Chinese medicine. I feel relieved I remembered all 5. I know there's 5. So what would happen there? I'd have to call each of you at home later with the last one. So, but we have them, the 5 stagnations. These are the risk factors, and each person needs to assess on their own. So, and cold, of course, would be involved with any of them could be called cold in a certain sense, but anything that slows down would be called cold in Chinese medicine. So those are the risk factors. And so I knew where I was going with this. If you're treating yourself well, so, oh, there's a pandemic illness. We're not surprised. None of you were surprised that this was coming down the road. It's absolutely predictable. And in fact, it's a certainty. So, a lot of wind outside. So, and you're taking care of yourself. You're flowing with change. Remember, wind is a carrier of change. That's its mission. If we can change, we won't get sick. If we hold still, then we don't know. Then we're in jeopardy. It's a risk factor. Resisting change is a risk factor of its own. Psychological risk factor, resisting change. And but now someone in the family becomes sick with COVID and they're in an upstairs bedroom, but you've been hydrating, then you say, I have to take care of them. This is someone in my family, or it's my roommate, it's a neighbor. I have to take care of them. That's when you would have garlic. That's when you might have onions. That's when you may have chili pepper in a soup, not a saute, but you have a soup with chili pepper, with garlic, and only for a week, as you're carrying the soup to them to help them through it. It would be a different soup to them. The garlic would not be, at that point, it would be another strategy. Does that make sense? That's when we would use the garlic, like in the Middle Ages with the plague.
Yeah. Listen, thank you so much. There's just one more question and then we'll let you go because this is fascinating.
Okay.
Just talking about the citrus peel, does non-aged citrus peel have similar effects to Chen Pi? And if you use citrus peel as described in tea, is it for the same reasons you throw Chen Pi into a decoction?
Oh, I missed a little bit because of the noise here. So you're saying, are other peels?
Can you use non-aged?
Oh, non-aged. So yes, you can. You can. Remember, we're talking about medicine, which means that the medicine lives inside you. You can look around. What do you have to do medicine with? You forgot your needles. Well, maybe you can use an elbow or something, and you just look around for whatever you can use. So someone is sick, we're in a lockdown period perhaps, or a particular family might be in quarantine if someone is sick, which is probably a better way to do it. And then now you can only use what you have. So you toss some fresh oranges, onto their porch, or you hoist them up to their window, and all they have is fresh. It's absolutely fine. You want to wash them off if they're not organically grown. But again, this is acute medicine. The problem with organics or the pesticides is more of a long-term problem. So I would still just go ahead and use them. Put a little blessing on them for the pesticides and dive right in. So yeah, the fresh, there are differences in herbal medicine between fresh and immature and mature. We use these differentiations if you have them all. But I like the stories about the old practitioners that would travel on foot. And this is my teacher and Ann teacher, Jeffrey Yuan. His grandfather he would have a pouch, so it's easy to carry. And there would only be about 12 herbs in there and a couple sets of needles, maybe a gold needle, and some stuff, in other words, you're carrying everything you need like this. You can't have that much. You just use it in many, many different ways. So, which is the fun of it. So kitchen medicine, if you like. So, but my answer, someone else might differ, say, oh no, it really does make a difference. Ultimately, if you have a full dispensary, we want to use mature citrus peel. But when it comes to you fresh, it is mature citrus peel. it's ripened, it's orange. That's what it is. So the other one would be the green. The immature citrus is harder to get in modern markets because that's not what people want to eat. So, but when it comes to in a market, it's usually mature. So if you wanted the immature, we're looking for the sour. So you might use, just in a general market, you might use lime. Or if you don't have that, you say, oh, I have something sour. I have some red wine vinegar, or I have some rice vinegar. So you would use citrus peel with a little vinegar. So you just improvise your way through things. That's what we do,
Yes.
right? So remember, the medicine is your understanding. It's not even your training; it's your understanding. That's your secret superpower. As we say in America, that's your superpower. Is your understanding. So, and diet is very important. So, as a dietitian in Chinese medicine, as we sign off, I'll just make the case that every acupuncture treatment should be accompanied with dietary advice to make the treatment stronger, to make it last, and to make sure it's not sabotaged by their diet. This is just tremendously important. I'm sure you've all discovered that and just want to boost that, your confidence in that, or refocus you to your confidence in it. So we have sound outside. It got very, very noisy.
Yeah.
Thank you for allowing me to add the dietary perspective and to sit in Ann's seat for a moment.
It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing with us. We really appreciated both your sharing. So on behalf of everybody, thank you so much.